Hi, welcome to another edition of 2 October's Live. Today we're going to talk about intent over keywords in the age of AI. Specifically, how it's better to focus on user intent rather than only keywords when it comes to building content that resonates with your audience and that will win you visibility on search and AI tools. My name is Brett Woodward. I'm a senior SEO at 2 Octobers. I've worked with lots of different businesses in my almost 6 years at the company. And when I hear things about keywords in conversations with clients, it's typically questions like, do we have the right keywords? Do we need to add more keywords? What keywords should we be optimizing for here? Now, keywords are important, but they're not the only thing. So I want to step back in this talk and kind of reframe the conversation around intent. Today, what we're going to talk about is some of the risks that you run by using keywords as the primary driver for your content strategy, and why thinking about things from an intent perspective is a much better way to do it. I also want to introduce a few different concepts that you may not have heard before, one of them being query counting, and how you can use that for better topic research and page performance measurement. So the traditional model looked a little bit like this. You do some keyword research by trying to find high volume search terms, which are terms that many people search for. You add those keywords to the pages that you're trying to optimize, and then you measure that performance by tracking rankings and clicks for those keywords. So to be clear, keywords are still important, but they shouldn't be driving your strategy solely. And good SEOs have evolved past this model into something else, which we'll talk about in a second. But I did want to highlight that this is still the way that a lot of clients are thinking about things, and how if you feel yourself gravitating towards this model, you may want to back up and have a listen to what we're going to cover. So it's more than just a matching game these days. Search engines and AIs are seeking really to answer the intent behind a query. They're trying to solve the problem that the user has, even if they don't search for it in the exact same words. Now, better answers are often going to outperform the closest keyword matching content. So if you fixate on keywords and you use keywords as the driver of your strategy from beginning to end, you run some risks. And some of those risks are that you may have a narrower scope of focus. And that narrower scope of focus, which is really just focused on the keywords that you've identified, that may not meet the searcher's intent based on the query that they typed into Google or an AI tool. You also may miss out on some important lower funnel topics. If you're caught in the game of searching for high volume keywords, you may miss out on what we call long tail keywords, which are more specific, usually have more words in them, and get at a problem that they're trying to solve that is typically a little further in the funnel than maybe a broader term might be. And then if you're not meeting the searcher's intent and not sufficiently solving the problem that they have because of your narrower focus, search engines and AIs may pass over your content in favor of content that more comprehensively answers the question that the searcher has. So if you take anything away from the presentation, this is pretty much what I'd want you to focus on. So the keyword focus lens is, what are the most common ways that people search for this topic? How do I get that onto my content? That doesn't really work as well in an AI forward ecosystem. What I'd like you to focus on is thinking about what the problem is that the searcher is trying to solve, and how can you effectively solve that problem for them by providing them valuable information. So here's a concept that you may not have heard as much as you've heard search volume, and that's intent volume. While search volume is taking the aggregate number of people who search for a particular phrase, intent volume is looking for the aggregate demand behind a single search intent. And it doesn't matter exactly how people search it, as long as the intent is the same. So here's one example. I have 6 queries here. They're all different ways of asking for the same thing. So if there's one intent here and multiple ways that people are searching for this intent, they all want to find the best lights to use while riding a mountain bike at night, but they may not all type them the same way into these chat tools or search engines. So the intent volume would be all the different ways in which people might search for this, but all still relating to the singular intent of finding this product. So intent volume, I think, is a great lens for establishing content strategy because people search differently than they used to. With the advent of AI, everyone is getting a little bit more comfortable typing longer queries, sometimes conversational sounding queries, into these tools. They're getting more specific with what they're asking because they know that these tools are more able to find them a good answer. Whereas if you typed in 2 sentences into Google 5 years ago, you'd get really poor results, and that's not the case now. AIs also do something called fan-out queries. And so this is also important to understand because it gets at the idea that there are more ways in which someone searches for something and more ways in which someone is going to try to use a particular framework to make a decision. So AI systems basically break down the main question, which in the previous example was give me good recommendations on mountain bike lights that I can use at night or something like that. It'll break down that prompt into multiple related subqueries to try to generate a comprehensive answer. So it may make a subquery search for best mountain bike lens lumens, or how many lumens do I need for mountain biking at night? Or is it better to have a battery powered or USB rechargeable headlight, or headlight that clamps to the bars versus headlight that clamps to your helmet? And these are all things that a real person may use to make their decision of what the best mountain biking light is for them, but they didn't necessarily type that. AI is able to go and retrieve those fan-out queries, understand what makes a good headlight in a variety of different ways, and then bring all that back to you and stitch it together into a comprehensive answer. So largely, these queries and intent are expressed across a much more fragmented set of searches, and we need to pay attention to those searches so that we can better serve that intent. So the traditional model, like I said, it's not really a great lens in AI search because behavior is fragmented across different searches and intent is key to solving the user problems. But here's a better model for AI search that focuses on real user intent. Instead of looking for high volume keywords, look for intents that people have in high volume. So what is a question that people have at large degrees, or a problem that people have most often, even if they're not expressing that problem the same way? And once you've identified an intent, you can build content that satisfies that intent. And you're not limiting yourself to a particular set of keywords, but you're narrowing your focus onto a particular problem to solve. And then instead of just tracking how you're doing with the keywords that you're optimizing for, you can use query counting to measure your content's relevance across a much broader realm of terms. So this is a screenshot from a tool called Also Asked. Also Asked is a tool created by Mark Williams Cook, who is a well-known SEO who runs an agency and contributes to SEO in lots of different ways. But I bring this up because this is a free tool that you can use. There are premium features, but it really gets at the point that there are lots of different subqueries that people make that are all related to sort of one basic intent. And you may miss out on important questions if they don't share the same words. So if you were to, say, years ago, make a piece of content that was targeting how do I train my husky as a search term and keyword, you may have missed out on some of these other things that are related but don't typically come up in traditional keyword research because they're not using the exact same language. So this is just an example kind of fan out queries, not in that these are the fan out queries that AIs make, but they do the same thing, and then they help you break down the initial intent into what are the different things related to that intent that we can try to provide information on that will help people form a decision. So what you want to do is look at your own data, like Google Search Console, and third-party data if you can find good tools like Also Asked or others to identify topic patterns. So what are the topics that people are searching for the most, and what are some of the questions that they have about those topics? Determine the intent that they're trying to satisfy and the problems that they are trying to solve, and then look for the problems with lots of different ways in which people search for them. So that's that intent volume. If you're seeing a ton of different queries that all sort of are related to how do I make my husky behave or train my husky to do a certain thing, and you see lots of queries related to that, that's high intent volume, even though individually those queries may not have a lot of search volume associated with them. So when we get to building the content, you really want to let the intent of the problem and the query guide the coverage of that content. So is it a broad query, like how do I train my husky, and somebody maybe wants a lot of surface level information about different things, or maybe they have a very specific question that they're asking, how can I train my husky to be calm at night? And that sort of opens the door into a lot of other different questions that you may want to dive into and be more specific with. So you always want to let the intent that you identify guide how deep you go and the broad range of coverage that you try to build your content around. You need to ask yourself also, what's going to constitute a complete resolution to the intent here? What is the best answer that this person could hope for? And then work towards creating that. So it's not rocket science really, where we want to have keywords in there to some degree, but really what we're trying to do here is solve people's problems. And ideally, our resolution to that problem will help them move forward to another stage in their journey, whether that's trying to engage with you more deeply or get information around a particular problem. If your content helps them resolve their issue to the point they're ready to take the next step, whatever that next step may be, then your content has done its job. And we could talk a lot about building good content. I actually did a previous 2 Octobers live edition around building content that serves your customers. And that's a great place to start if you want more information on satisfying the intent. But in a nutshell, figure out what the intent is, try to understand the different things that would help them solve their problem, create that, and move them along in their journey. And then finally, we get to measuring relevance and how do we track whether our content is performing well, or if the content that we have is resonating, or if it's working or not. Query counting is kind of another way of framing intent volume, and it can help you do that. So the query count is the number of unique queries that a page or a website has visibility for or impressions for a particular topic. So if we take the mountain bike or the husky example, if you have a page related to those things and that page over time has more queries that it's serving for, or that is being served for related to that topic, then you can likely infer that that page is becoming relevant for that topic, and search engines and AIs are perceiving it to be highly relevant and helpful for that content, and you're getting shown to more people in more varieties of ways who all have that same intent but are looking for them differently. And so you can infer if you get more queries, you have better relevance and you match the user's intent a little bit better. And you can track those query counts, those numbers of queries that you're getting traction for over time to inform whether you are gaining relevance or losing relevance. And you can make adjustments as necessary from there. So one way you could do that with your own data is in Google Search Console. This is the 2 October's Search Console data. And what I've done here is I've pulled the last 3 months of data and I've looked for queries that contain the word bot. And what I'm trying to understand is we have a number of different pages and resources about bot traffic. And I want to understand if that page is, or those pages, depending on how specific I get with my filtering, are over time being served for more of these queries, which would indicate more relevance and better match of the intent of the search, or less over time, in which case maybe we need to adjust the content and make it more helpful. And you can see I've color-coded a few of these, but they are slightly different intents. They're all kind of related to the same thing of bot traffic, but we could get more specific with these. The greens are related to trying to exclude or block or remove bot traffic from Google Analytics. Blue is identifying it, seeing what it looks like. How do I know it's bot traffic? And then you've got some really broad terms in that red block of GA4 bot traffic, Google Analytics. It's not as clear what the intent is for that as for the blue and the green, but what we can see is overall for bot traffic in general, we got 158 queries that our website was matched to in the past 3 months. And you can see that down in the bottom. If we were to pull that data for a different period, we would find a different amount of queries. And we could measure over time whether that number is greater or smaller. And if it's greater, we can assume that we're matching intent and that we're being relevant because we're getting matched to more queries. And if it's smaller, you'll be able to identify that we may be losing relevance, and there may be ways we can make that content better. I really like to look at this on a line graph chart. And in our tool, Branch Explorer, which we have for clients and can set up, we can see much more easily without having to pull separate periods of data specifically and look at a glance if we are gaining unique queries or losing them over time as they relate to a particular topic or a particular page. And I really like looking at this over time because it gives us a sense of, are we getting matched to more searches or not? As people get more used to using AI tools and using longer tail keywords and chatting with these tools more conversationally, there's going to be more and more ways that people search for the same thing. And ideally, we want to show up for all of those that are related to the topic that we've got. And if we measure query counts, we'll be able to tell at a high level if we are gaining or losing relevance. And that can really help us focus our content on better strategies. And so again, just to bring it all home again, try to focus more on intent than keywords. Keywords are important and you need to have them in certain places, but they can't be the end all be all of your strategy. Instead, you should focus on the problem that the searcher is trying to solve and providing the best information possible to them so that they can solve their issue, resolve their question, and then move forward in their journey. And that is the presentation. Thanks so much for joining, and good luck query counting and measuring intent volume and trying to optimize for the problem that people actually have.